welcome to this Conversations podcast. My name's Jane Poore. I'm adoption consultant here at Core and Bath, and I'm delighted to be joined today by Alistair, who I will let him introduce himself more fully in a second, but he is panel chair, has been panel chair for a long time and has recently retired, is a dad, an adopted parent, and a single parent as well, aren't you, Alistair?
Yeah, indeed.
And I think we should have full declaration in that we have known each other for probably far too many years, probably something like 20 years now, haven't we? And we've worked together in various guises. I think at one point I was panel advisor and you were panel chair. We've both been involved in the same region of the country. And Alistair contacted me recently because he has just retired, and I thought it'd be really great to listen to some of his experience and some of the things that have changed. So welcome, Alistair, and thank you for joining us today. Do you want to just add to any description that I've missed out?
No, well, thank you, Jane. Yeah, no, it's really good to be joining you, and thank you for the warm welcome. And now I think, well, you've done a very comprehensive introduction, but yeah, no, I think we even had a link back through Families for Children, the adoption agency that sadly now closed.
True.
Yeah, where I used to,
yes.
As well as being a kind of single parent adopter and then chairing panel, I used to be a peer mentor for the scheme there and also contribute to the adoption training there. So yeah, I obviously got different range of experience of adoption, but still feel I'm learning. I think it's an ongoing process, adoption. So always, hopefully something to contribute, but also lots more to learn as well. But yeah, no, it's nice to be chatting with you and hopefully people who are going to be watching today.
Yeah. So if we just start with your role as panel chair, and as you say, you came with all this experience as an adopter and as a parent, as a single parent, and I don't think you'll mind me saying that your son has some additional needs, so you're familiar with all that, the requirement for accessing post-adoption support and your experiences around that, weren't you?
Yeah.
So can you remember when you first became a chair, what it was like? And well, you were a panel member before that, and I mean, my memory of you is being absolutely you used to scrutinize post-adoption support plans, which was absolutely welcome, to ensure that they were fit for purpose for the adopters and the child and the families going forward. And I think it's really important that there is someone like that on every panel. Was that something you kind of thought you were going to do when you joined? Was it something you specifically took the role on for?
Yeah, no, good question. I mean, no, I don't think it was to start with, but I think I realised that was obviously something particular I could contribute. I mean, if I wind back to my own experiences, you alluded to, my son is 22 now, came to live with me when he was nearly 8. So an older child, and he had some already identified needs, and then more recently, since he came to live with me, he had other identified needs, including a learning disability and autism diagnosis. But even his support plan, it was in the days before the Adoption Support Fund, and I was very lucky to have a very experienced social worker who helped make sure that I had a very comprehensive support plan. So I think that draws me back to, I mean, we were lucky in the pre-ASF days, we had 3 years of therapeutic support, which was a big commitment from the local authority, and then also other support. So I think I realised how important that was to me. And whilst obviously everyone's experience is different, I think you do bring the principle of the fact that it's really important to ensure that there is a good support plan in place and that it's as specific as possible to the needs of the child and the whole family. And I think the good thing was the support plan also took into account my needs as well as my son's needs. So it was quite a holistic approach, and so I think I kind of valued that, therefore wanted to bring that experience to to my role as a panel member. But I think when I went into it, no, it was more just, I think someone, a friend of mine who was a social worker, a colleague of yours, I think at Families for Children, said to me, now you've been a parent for 2 or 3 years, I think you'd have something to offer to panel. And then I think the focus on support plans sort of developed as I went along, and it seemed to be an area that people were welcoming my contribution. So yeah, I think in answer to your question, I didn't come specifically with that in mind, but that's sort of part of my role developed. And I think when you become chair, then obviously your role widens out anyway, because you're there not just to think about the support plan, you've obviously got to think about the whole process of adoption. But for me, it's, you know, it is really important. I think that, well, as you know, I think the whole process needs to be focused on the needs of the child and the family. And so hopefully, you know, my own experience of adoption brings part of that picture, not the whole of it, obviously, but so, yeah.
Yeah, and I think now, and we'll probably talk in a minute a bit more about how things have changed, you know, to now, but there is that emphasis much more now on the not only the child's needs but the adoptive family's needs, but also the birth family's needs as well. And it's kind of opened out to include those three sides of the triangle, which always should have been there, really. But I think we have become more aware of that. Have you seen other things change? What was better then, Alistair, and what's better now?
Absolutely. No, good question. Well, and as you rightly say, I mean, I think the three-legged stool, almost, including particularly the birth family as well, and I mean that was probably less considered in mine and my son's plan, although, you know, we have had some important opportunities to maintain relationships and contact with them. But I think for me that's been a big change, obviously, over the 10 plus years I've been chairing, the greater emphasis on staying in touch, I guess what would have been called contact, but now maintaining relationships, and obviously that includes different forms of contact. And I think that's partly been driven by the courts, of course, the legal changes, but also based on best practice through the University of East Anglia research, I think, highlighting the value of contact. I think particularly also the role of birth grandparents sometimes. I mean, you know, it doesn't always have to be birth parents. In my son's case, one of his siblings, his younger sibling, actually, we met up with them quite recently, and we've had some regular contact with them for various reasons. We haven't had face-to-face contact with birth parents, but actually the sibling contact and his foster carers have also been a really important part. And I think it's an important message to give children who are adopted, that not everything and everyone who has been part of their lives in the past, who they've loved or may have loved them but weren't able to look after them, you know, that they're not lost to them and they're still able. That's an important part of their identity. So I think that's really welcome. I mean, in terms of other things, I guess the biggest change, it was almost exactly halfway through my 10 plus years, was the move to virtual panels, obviously in March 2020, I think it was, wasn't it? And by coincidence, I think within Adopt Southwest, where I was the chair, I happened to chair the first virtual panel, and I think the advisors did an amazing job of getting us all suddenly online. I mean, at that point, I don't think we'd even really heard of Teams, and, you know, we were all dialing in by phone and all of that.
We all became experts overnight, didn't we?
Overnight. And then, you know, and of course we still, even years later, still ask, you're still on mute and all that kind of stuff.
Yes.
But I mean, joking apart, I think that has had a big change. And I mean, obviously, in terms of adapting to the circumstances and allowing panels to keep going, that's been really positive, because otherwise they would have stopped in the short term. I guess in the agency I was part of, Adopt Southwest, they've decided to stay with virtual panels, as a number of agencies have. I think, you know, I think the jury's still out about the long-term pros and cons of that. I mean, in terms of pros, I think it's made panels more accessible and more diverse in many ways. It's made, you know,
yes, because there can be, particularly the Southwest is not a particularly diverse area either. So presumably you were able to access some panel members from other areas to add richness and representation to your panels. And I think, you know, it does add that ability for adopters to be seen in their own homes, and prospective adopters to feel relaxed, maybe, and it solves all the problems with childcare and all those things. You know, maybe you do get the best out of people when they're relaxed in their own home and their social workers with them, supporting them. There are downsides to it as well, I think, and I think you think there are downsides to it too.
Yes, I mean, you know, I guess in the end, the panels, obviously, it's the interests of the child and that need to come first. I mean, certainly, so I guess that's the bit that's less clear, I think, you know, I mean, because it's time. I mean, certainly in terms of the panel process, obviously, there's the, you know, I think you don't get quite the same sense of the prospective adopters online. You're obviously not able to use all your senses in quite the same way. I think you get better at it. Certainly, I'd find, I've had to relearn what it was to be a chair, really. But I think managing difficult conversations online is obviously can be more of a challenge. I think delivering difficult news, obviously, when panel doesn't recommend or defers, I think is more challenging online. And I think you have a bit more of a limited sense of what's going on. I mean, obviously, panel members generally are probably the people that most miss the face-to-face. I mean, I think for social workers generally, in my experience, is they tend to welcome it because there's less travel time for them, and obviously senior managers too. There are clearly benefits in terms of cost savings, and as you alluded to, I mean, prospective adopters, I guess, don't have a lot to compare it with unless they've done it pre and post. But yeah, I mean, I think we have made virtual panels work as well. Not to say we can't improve things still, but as as well to some degree as you can. But yeah, I guess to have a long-term study and whether there's been impacts in terms of breakdowns or disruptions, I guess would be an interesting piece of work, wouldn't it, to see?
Yeah, I think so. I think it, because certainly there was an increase. I mean, disruptions in adoption are always pretty low anyway, but I think there was a bit of a rise post pandemic, and I think that was partly to do with assessments being done online, and there's all sorts of reasons behind it. I think, I mean, new adopters not being able to access their support networks in the way that they would maybe as well in the early times. So it's never just straightforward, is it?
No, absolutely no. And obviously those immediate things have now passed. And obviously there were, there was obviously the pressure for children's social workers too, wasn't there, not being able to kind of visit families in the same way, and suddenly, the rise of kind of domestic abuse in people were often quite trapped, weren't they? And
I did do a piece of work with some other panels, and we looked at it was put in a spreadsheet of the pros of online panels, and what you lose from doing them online, and all the things that you gain from doing it online are things like you've referred to, finance, and social workers continue working right until their slot is available online, so they don't have to take a whole day off to travel. You don't have to book rooms. There's that lack of you don't need childcare because you're there at home, all those things, and they're all process led, they're all systems and process driven are the advantages, and the things that you lose are all the human interaction and the observation of being in the room together, and those subtleties of body language, and those relationship building between the panel members that you referred to, and things. And when you actually write them down like that, it becomes really quite clear that you're actually gaining systems things and losing relational stuff. But yeah, I think it'd be great to do a big piece of research around it, wouldn't it? To actually, maybe we'll have a think about
maybe
that.
Another one for you, Jane.
Something to put on our list. Yeah.
I mean, that in a way that mirrors the wider issues, doesn't it, of the change in the world of work when you're moving online. I mean, you summed it up very, very nicely. I mean, I think obviously, to expand on I think that there are plenty of positives, and I would be positive as well, as and I think it's allowed us to continue in a way, and I think it's also helped us focus on developing a certain professionalism on the process side that you alluded to as the process, in a way. It allows you to focus on them a bit more, doesn't it? And we've got better as chairs of including panel members more and so forth. I mean, I think you learn the skill how to manage time online can be more difficult because people don't pick up the same cues in the meeting, and obviously and how to move people on without being rude and interrupting them online is is an art, I think, isn't it?
So let's just have a talk about it, because I'm aware that that there isn't actually that much advice or training for panel chairs around there. I mean, we obviously run a panel chairs training course, and we have got the the Effective Panels book. Apart from that, there's not that much support for panel chairs. if you know there's panel chairs listening, what would you say to them that are the biggest challenges of chairing panels, Alistair? And that you know, they've changed a little bit, obviously, because now you're doing it online. But you know, anything that you find
Yeah, no,
worse now?
Yes, no, I think you've already, as you've implied, it can be quite a lonely role at times. I mean, you know, in that sense. I mean, for us,
Yeah,
because we have 4 chairs within, you know, within the Adopt Southwest, where I
yeah,
chaired. So obviously, building the relationship with other chairs was key for me, both locally and nationally. So locally, 2 of the 3 other chairs happened to live quite locally, so we did actually meet in person throughout for
oh, that's
you know,
good. Yeah,
semi-professional, semi-cover. We
yeah,
just met for a cuppa and supported each other, and you know,
yeah,
it was a mixture of
yeah,
social and professional. That was invaluable. So
yeah,
I did
that's
certainly
good.
encourage. And then obviously I benefited hugely from the quorum Bath practice, the chair forum,
Yeah,
which
yeah,
I found really
yeah,
helpful. I mean that, and then also at a more local level, we had the SWAC, Southwest Adoption Consortium
yeah,
chairs meetings. So
yeah.
those were really helpful. I mean, I think in
So
terms of,
try and meet up with other chairs
I would
to
certainly, well, for me,
yeah,
that's been invaluable, and I
yeah,
think it, you know,
yeah,
you can share difficult cases. I mean, as you know, we
yeah,
can bring sort of confidential practice situations and get ideas
yeah,
from people, and I've done
yeah,
that a bit certainly. I think I think also some of it is about, in terms of advice, is well, like anything, is with time trusting in your own instincts, but also being open
yeah,
to critical feedback. I mean, one of the things we do a lot of in Dot Southwest, we have a time at the end of each panel for a reflection. What, you know, once
yeah.
we finish
That's
the
good.
cases,
Yeah,
and I
yeah,
think as chair, it's important that you offer yourself up for sort of, you know, critical reflection as well. I mean, in a constructive
yeah,
way. So I, you know, often learnt people suggested things to me or things I perhaps could have done differently, and you know, I
yeah,
welcomed that. So I think as chair,
yeah,
you need to create that kind of, well, it's a professional CPD climate, really, isn't it, where you're
yes,
always
yeah.
learning.
And
Um,
did you do that at the end of every panel?
We do, yes. We have a
Yeah,
time, you know, it's a gendered time at the end to do that. And I think, you know, particularly, I mean, on straightforward panels, it may be, I mean, normally we use, well, the way I used to do it, we each went around and talked about something positive about the day, and then something for our learning, or something that perhaps didn't work as well, or we thought there
yeah.
were things to learn. And, you know,
Sounds
not
good.
everyone always wanted to share, but and I think particularly when you had more challenging panels, that was even more important, really,
Yeah,
you know.
yeah,
And then also, I mean, as chair and the advisors, we usually made ourselves available to panel members if there'd been you know, a tricky situation, because or even not something that might seem straightforward could trigger particular things for an
yeah,
individual panel member. I
yeah,
think that's important to be open to
yeah,
that. So
yeah,
yeah, and I think, you know, in terms of advice, I think just trying to be as inclusive as you can in sharing, making, particularly
yeah,
online, you know, making sure, I mean, some panels, the chair asks most of the questions. They have a more conversational style, which has advantages. In other panels, you know, they go around more like you used to. I think there are pros and cons
yeah.
to each of those. But if you do the chair asking most of the questions, I think it is really important you give panel members, you know, good chance to follow up and include them.
Yeah,
So
yeah. I think one of the hardest things about I mean, time management in
yeah,
particular
yeah,
is a real challenge sometimes, because panel members are often bring with them all this enthusiasm and all
yes, indeed.
experience, and they've got a lot to contribute, and they've spent a long time reading all the paperwork before, so they can sit and talk about a case for 2.5, 3 hours if you let them.
Yeah.
So how do you make sure that they stay on track and that they don't wander off into oh, I like the wallpaper at the back of your room, where did that come from? And you know, and just ensuring that it comes back to the child every time, and the child's experience, and what it's going to be like for a child living in their house, not just because they fancy knowing it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, I think because, I mean, within the Dot South, which we ask panel members, we have what we call a strengths, vulnerabilities, and questions form that we ask people to submit in advance. So the chair does quite a lot of the
Okay,
collation beforehand. So that helps kind of
okay.
manage the.
So
I
you
mean,
can see what the areas are that the panel members may be
yeah,
thinking they want to ask
explore.
before you meet.
Yeah, absolutely. Although it, you know,
Okay.
it's additional work for, well, for the panel members and the chair beforehand. I
Yeah.
think it has pros in terms of managing the and then we spend time before we go into the virtual room with the adopters, we spend time just looking at them, and you know, there might be a question that I think is a bit controversial, but I'd leave it in there to prompt some discussion with panel members, and then we, you know, decide whether we include it or not, or we might reframe the question, you know, the way you did in you know, in physical panel, you know, in face-to-face panels. In fact, does that. I mean, in many ways, I find as chair probably the two challenges with prospective adopters are, one, if you have a very nervous prospective adopter or adopters who need drawing out, and so I think that way it's about building the rapport and having a bit of the social chit chat at the beginning, you know, and maybe talking about where they live and all that kind of stuff.
At ease.
I mean, in some ways,
skill for chairs, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in some ways, the more difficult challenge is prospective adopters who are perhaps a bit over loquacious, shall we say, and then it, you know, because you know, I think again that's a sign of nerves sometimes, isn't it? You say more than you need to, and I think online that is more difficult to you know, to interrupt without appearing rude. I mean, I've learned then too, and I had some helpful feedback from the ADM too, actually, in Dr. I think that I was a bit clearer at the beginning about my role, that to assure the prospective adopters that I would make sure they had time to answer the questions, and they didn't need to say everything. It wasn't like an interview where they had to say everything that they needed to, you know, and so you set the parameters a bit more clearly at the start, and generally I think that can help as well in terms of timekeeping.
But it is tricky, especially when you've got some of those cases where the answers are not clear cut, are they? And I think that's partly the interesting part of the role of those cases where you know, it makes you think and reflect on your own values and listen to other people's values and try and be inclusive around that as well.
And no, absolutely. And I think a bit like we're having now, I mean, I think another key skill to develop is, or you may have a list of pre-prepared questions, but developing a conversational style as chair. So I think then people don't feel like they're being interviewed. I mean, I guess that's how you get the best out of people, isn't it? That they're almost having a conversation. And I think for me, I started off thinking that all panel members should ask questions. Actually, I've been slightly converted to the pros of the chair asking most of the questions, because I think it allows you to develop a more conversational style with the prospective adopters. You know, they don't feel they're being kind of fired questions at from a group of people. But you know, I guess it's working that out. But however you do it, I think that, you know, the conversational style, I'd say, is a really important skill. And I certainly didn't have that, you know, to start with. I think online, I think that takes time, and you know, you need to be true to your own style too. So I'd encourage panel chairs to, you know, their style won't be mine, and nor should it be, you know.
So as a chair, you develop your own style, and your panel will have a feel of your chairing and it being your kind of style. What about social workers attending panel, Alistair? Because they sometimes get a harder rap than the prospective adopters, don't they?
Well, I mean, up front and centre, I would say that I think all panel members and chairs particularly need to hang on to the fact that they're doing a darn difficult job in very pressurised. And I think we do, as a basic rule of thumb, I think we need to thank children's social workers at all. You know, you can't thank people enough, and I think that's a key one. I mean, in terms of tips for chairs, I think your job is to thank everyone, really. And you know, occasionally that means, I mean, sometimes we thank people even when perhaps they haven't done as, you know, what we might consider they haven't done as good a job as they might have done. But I think it's recognizing the pressures on them that may have led to that. And it doesn't mean, you know, I think if you're thanking and supportive, you can then have the challenges as well, can't you? So I think that would be my starting point. I mean, I think in terms of advice to them, I would say that if you're committed to the child, which the overwhelming majority of children's social workers are, then that shows through in panel. I would say and that counts for, you know, covers a multitude of kind of other things in a way, doesn't it? I think also to be honest, if you don't know something, you know, if you've only just taken on the case, you need to be honest and say you don't know, rather than kind of, you know, blather and pretend you do. That, I mean, that's much better for panel to know that you don't know something, and but also that you agree that you'll try go away and find out. And I think, you know, it sounds a trivial thing, but I think you and I remember chatting with you about this in face-to-face panels. But I think even in virtual panels, it gives confidence to panel and the chair if the social worker has some way of recording actions, you know, whether that's a notebook and something to, you know, it seems, you know, I mean,
they always used to turn up with nothing.
Well, occasionally. I mean, even on the virtual panel, they could be just doodling and thinking the chairs are a chair's a right so and so, but at least it's encouraging panel to think that they're taking notes, isn't it?
So appear that you are writing down what's being said to you. Absolutely.
No, obviously, joking apart, I think it's just something about having the confidence to know that, and also I think it's fine, I think, to be as open. Sometimes it's hard not to be defensive, but I think, I think panel obviously will try, certainly I try to create a climate where the social workers hopefully won't feel defensive. I mean, obviously sometimes we get that wrong, but I think the more open the social workers are to sometimes panel have some hopefully good suggestions to make, and sometimes the social workers can push back a bit and actually say, well, that's something, but actually we have already considered that, and there's a good reason why we're not needing a risk assessment or whatever it might be. I think it's a debate, So
and presumably, as you chair a panel for a long time, you get to know. Although obviously we acknowledge the turnover in numbers of social workers, but presumably you do get to know some of them who come more than once.
Absolutely.
Panel.
And that's nice too. And obviously for panel, I mean, I appreciate the social worker. It's not within their gift often, but if you've had a social worker that's worked through the child since they were first being considered to go into care, and they worked with the birth family, may have even worked with some of the siblings. That's a richness of the situation, doesn't it? And I think other things, if you're a newly qualified social worker, or you've just taken over the case, you would obviously hope and expect that the manager
someone will go with them,
support you, and
absolutely.
I think it's not just down to them. But I think an openness, a commitment to the child, willingness to show that you're learning. I think all those are really positive qualities, aren't they? For social workers.
Absolutely. And there is that divide between frontline social work teams and the adoption teams. Indeed. Now quite often. And there's fewer opportunities for children's social workers to get the experience in adoption, maybe. So it's probably more of a team effort than it was before, even, maybe.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No, and you're right. Thinking as you've implied, I've probably, in my answer to the question, I've been focused quite a bit on the children's social worker. In terms of the assessing social workers, you obviously you particularly build up a relationship, because obviously they come to the panel, and I think I hope you come to have a mutual respect for, hopefully they come to respect panel at its best, and we come to respect them. And I think as you get to know someone, in some ways it's easier to do supportive challenge, isn't it? It's probably harder when you first met someone, and I mean, I think another bit of advice for panel chairs, I would say, I mean, obvious in one sense, is if you're aware of difficulties when you read the paperwork, raise them early with the panel advisor. Don't leave them till panel. That's important. I think so. I think
so when the paperwork comes out, if panel realise something, they need to be feeding that through to you as chair or advisor, so that you can make decisions about those early, not leaving it to the day and then going, oh well, we need to defer this because we haven't worked this through.
Absolutely. And I think a good piece of advice for chairs is, I would never want to embarrass the social workers in front of the prospective adopters if I could possibly help that. I think that's not, it's not good practice, is it, to do that? I mean, very occasionally you can't avoid challenging something because something comes to light in the middle of the meeting, but or some, but that I would say that's to be absolutely avoided if you can.
So be supportive to your social workers and fully appreciate everything they're putting in.
And so occasionally we might have, if there are some clear gaps and we've raised them in advance but they haven't been addressed, we might get the social worker into to panel without the adopters to start with, to talk about that first. I mean, we try to avoid that, but that's another way you can manage that sometimes.
Just get them in early, particularly if, I mean, obviously if it's something about references or something, then you have to, but as you say, there may be a scenario where you wish to just talk to them on their own about something related to the process or the detail of the assessment or something. So let's just move on to the new adoption support plan, which I think you've had an opportunity to see now, maybe, and hopefully they're working their way through panels now. So we've made it a standalone document out of the adoption placement report, because despite our best attempts across the sector, adopters were still saying they didn't know they had a support plan, and it was just getting buried in there. And we know that everyone did, because they couldn't have gone to panel without one. But, you know, asked 5, 6, 7 years down the line, where's your adoption support plan? What did it say in there about your child? People were saying, well, I don't think I ever had an adoption support plan. So it is much more detailed now, and I appreciate that that's probably more work for social workers. I think it kind of draws everything together, and as you say, it now incorporates birth parents and staying in touch. And I think one of the things that I really wanted it to incorporate and maybe develop a bit more is the potential for vulnerabilities for adopters going forward, because I don't think we're always quite explicit enough about those in the assessments. And everybody has vulnerabilities, and I think we need to be just open about where those are so that we can put the support in there. I don't know what your thoughts are around that, or whether you send people away again to do more work around support plans and go and think about the vulnerabilities and what you're going to do about them.
I think the new plan, Jane, and all your work and others, I know you've consulted widely, is to be warmly welcomed. I think it is a much more holistic approach. I mean, yes, you're right. I think it is more work initially, but I think it bears fruit in the long term. And I guess also, I know you're going to sit that alongside updating the rest of the APR, aren't you? Because in the past there was a lot of repetition of the matching.
So we worked with Adoption England focus groups to start with. They did the focus group work on the adoption support plan, and then we kind of updated it and made it into the form and rewrote the guidance. My colleague Elaine Dibben wrote a lot of the guidance, but what we're then going to do is embed it more so that it's streamlined with the adoption placement report as well,
absolutely.
because
which I think is and obviously that bit's still happening, isn't it, which is fun. I mean, I think in the old plan there was a lot of repetition with the matching criteria, and then I think part of the problem, you sometimes felt the social worker kind of had enough of the match. So I mean, a classic used to be that there were health needs identified in the matching criteria, but and some quite good actions there, but they weren't carried forward into the support plan. Now, I think the new setup will obviously prevent that. I think particularly, as you said, it takes into account the needs of the whole family, and you break that down in the questions you ask, and I think that's really important. I mean, in terms of the section about what support the agency provides, I guess, I mean, it'd be interesting. I think there's still the same challenges about making sure that that's to use the acronym SMART, and that it's specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time bound, all that kind of stuff. I mean, that's still I think that's a challenge in any support plan, isn't it? It's quite easy to put in vague words. And I think obviously sometimes people say, well, it's not completely clear what the needs are yet, so that we can't be specific. That may be so in some cases, but at the very least you can agree to review something within a certain length of time when you've had an assessment. I mean, I think it's a more general point for me. It's a crude rule of thumb, but I think it has some truth in it. For me, in some ways, the older the child at the time of their placement, probably the more specific the support plan should be able to be, because there should be more history and potentially assessments and so forth. And I think time for review is often something that's left out, isn't it? And all the who's going to do what and by when, the kind of classic action planning thing. But I think the new plan allows that to happen. And in terms of your question about vulnerabilities, I think that's really good, because quite often at panel we see vulnerabilities identified in the approval stage, but they're not always carried forward into the support plan at matching. And I think that's I mean, just from my own experience, I certainly, before I adopted, I had a period of poor mental health, like many prospective adopters do, and part of the way that was addressed in the plan was to ensure there was really good support for me during the transition. I'm particularly being a single adopter, but it's just as much true for couples as well. You need that support. So some form of therapeutic consultancy or being available during transitions, for example, was important for me. So I welcome all that, I think, Jane, in terms of the emphasis on vulnerabilities.
And I think the way things are going with the modernisation of adoption is that that there is more recognition that those things need reviewing, and that we need to be checking in with our adopters long term, and just ensuring that our families are connected where they need to be connected, and that they've got those, because one thing about adopters is they will continue right until they are absolutely cannot cope anymore, won't they? And we know that there are adopters who are really struggling with some challenges from their children and their young people, and feel really isolated in that. And unless we know as agencies and as support workers, then we can't do anything about it. And I think the changes in the ASGSF that have now come into place and are still happening, and we don't know what's going to happen to them in the future. Absolutely critical that is retained in some form, that is there as a support. And I think you said earlier yourself that you'd use therapeutic input for your son, and I think we have his permission to share anonymously. And so you appreciate how much that is needed, and I think we all need to be shouting as loud as we can about just how important those resources are for families and adopted
Absolutely.
children.
No, we do. Yeah, and I think in our case, it was also support for both of us. I mean, the therapists we used initially worked with both my son around a little play-based therapy initially when he was younger, and also supported me, and then we've had various forms of therapy funded by ASF as that came in. I think, I mean, the one challenge of ASF, of course, is inevitably, because local authorities have obviously had and rightly so, there's been this fund, it's sometimes meant that they haven't always had to think quite so hard about how to support in the run up to transition. Sometimes we have people
say an application will be made.
Yeah, absolutely. And you then think, the question for panel is often, well, how is support going to be provided pre-placement and during the transitions before the ASF? And in some areas of the country at different times, the ASF there can be some delays sometimes. So that has been an issue occasionally. But absolutely. And I think the other thing on political point, the knowing that the fund is for the long term, year by year, is not very helpful for panels or for prospective adopters. I mean, I talk in both hats about that. Particularly when you come to the year end, you're not sure as a panel if you're approving a support plan where the support may not be available.
And therapists are not able to put in an application for a set amount of time because it goes over into the next year. Well, so I think we're probably just about running out of time, Alistair. We never have any problem filling our time.
I wonder what that says, Jane.
It's just gone. Is there anything else you want to say? I mean, it's so valuable listening to you as a really experienced panel member, and the experience that you bring personally to it as well. And it's amazing that you're always so willing to share that from your own experience as well, and it's really important. I know from my point of view that in doing the adoption support plan, there was some of you in there, Alistair, because I always have in my head, well, what would Alistair think about this support plan? Would this work for Alistair's scrutiny?
Yeah, well,
and if it wouldn't,
lucky you, Jane, to have my voice in your head.
But there must be, I don't know what your plans are now. You have all this free time, Alistair, but we're probably finding stuff for you to do as we actually speak.
Yeah, no, well, yes, no, I think adoption will, and obviously because it's so personal, it will always be part of my life. Yeah, no, I'm actually speaking at the Adopt Southwest annual conference on transition to adulthood shortly in October.
Brilliant.
So yes, that's an immediate thing. But I think in terms of final thoughts, for me, I think there is something about how we keep our skills up to date. I guess in some ways, as an adoptive parent and a panel chair, you have your lived experience that helps you, keep your. But again, that you the danger is you can become complacent, I think. So for panel chairs generally, I would say obviously it is really important we keep our skills up to date. Some of that you just learn by doing, don't you? Of course, but others about whether that's attending the practice groups that you run or other training events through both yourself and, in our case, the regional
Yeah.
consortium. I think that's really important. Learning from other people, I would say, for me, is probably the biggest, learning from other panel members, chairs, and in my case, of course, I'm well tuned into to the adoption networks, and I try and bring some of the learning from their experience, the other adopters, to panel. And I think that the other thing is, I think occasionally you can think as a panel chair and as panel members, are we making a difference? Perhaps you've given advice and you're not clear whether it's been taken or not. And sometimes occasionally you might make a recommendation and the ADM takes a different view. I would just encourage people to think, I think it does make a difference. I think I think what we can do, and all we can do, is do what we think is the best for that child and that family. And in the long run, that will be there recorded, and when the child, when they turn 18, can look back at their records, they'll see what panel tried to do for them. And if we're holding that at the forefront, I think panel does make a huge difference. And I think the expertise it brings, sometimes it's about specific advice. Sometimes it's just in the conversation you have with the social worker or the prospective adopters, maybe about maintaining relationships, all of those things. I think sometimes panel can play an educational role. So I'd encourage people that you're doing a really important and valuable role that will help. Help a child or children as they grow up. So keep going.
And thank you to you for all your, I don't know how, I think they said recently how many panels you'd experienced.
I think it was 140 or so or something.
140 something panels.
I think there were a few more missed off from the Taunton days probably, but
so but thank you for all your input. And I'm sure all the families that you have supported and that you've contributed to over those years, Alistair. It's been really valuable. So all the best to you and to your son going forward, and I'm sure we'll see you again at some point doing something. I'll find something else for you to write or do, Alistair.
I'll count on it, Jane. I'll count on it. I'll look forward to it. But thanks for the time.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Alistair.